Hello and welcome to an Omnath Locus of Creation deck tech. This is my second deck tech, and this deck is more casual when compared to the EDH Selvala deck I just went over. Omnath costs red, green, white, and a blue, and is a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. It also has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. If this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn, if it's the second time, add red, green, white, blue. So it basically gives you back its casting cost. It's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. So let's look over what this deck is trying to do. This deck is trying to cast stuff like Titania, Rampaging Baloths, Lotus Cobra, Omnath, Tatiova, Omnath, etc., which give you something whenever a land enters the battlefield in the form of landfall. And then we want to cast stuff like Cultivate, Skyshroud, Claim, Escape to the Wilds, Explore, Tempt with Discovery, Farseek, Kodama's Reach, and all of our fetch lands, which allow us to get multiple landfall triggers, and eventually overwhelm our opponents with sheer value. This deck doesn't rely on a combo, but it does have a lot of combo aspects to it, because these cards synergize very, very well together. And once you get a few of them out, you've basically won the game. Because imagine if you had Titania and Harrow and a few fetch lands. All of a sudden you have like 20 or 30 power on the field, and it will be nearly impossible for your opponents to come back from that. Omnath is good because what many landfall decks suffer from is that they don't have a win condition. Omnath is a win condition because he deals 4 damage to each opponent once you get that third landfall trigger, which really isn't that hard, considering how many spells we have which give us landfall. And he also just makes absurd amounts of mana. So if we play Omnath turn 4, turn 5, if we get a second land via fetch land or any of the things I said before, all of a sudden we have 9 mana. And then we can just slam down some big creatures like a Myria Shepherd or Rampaging Baloths, or slam down some more ramp, and then that just snowballs. So if you cast like a Risen Reef and a Harrow or something on turn 5, turn 6 you'll have like 12 mana, and then you should be winning the game from there. So let's look at some specific cards in this deck. Omnath Locus of Rage creates a 5/5 whenever a land enters the battlefield. This is probably one of the more powerful landfall payoffs you can use, but it's also very expensive at 7 mana. This deck runs a lot of big costed things, like stuff which is 5 mana or more, Tatiova, Omnath, Titania, Rampaging Baloths, etc. And we mainly do this because, like I said before, Omnath can make stupid amounts of mana, but we also have a lot of ramp. And one of my favorite pieces of ramp, which is a really big thing in CEDH, is Dockside Extortionist. Whenever he enters the battlefield, you create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. So he only costs 2 mana, and usually, even in casual, most of your opponents will have an Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, maybe a Lightning Greaves. You should at least get like 4 or more mana from this. And it could turn 2 into 4 mana, so if all of your opponents have an Arcane Signet, and maybe one of them has a Soul Ring, turn 2, you could just cast this, get 4 treasures, and then cast Omnath. And then the next turn, you'll have access to 9 mana from Omnath. So this is probably one of the underrated but most powerful cards in this deck. We also, of course, run Birds of Paradise. It's just an all-around good card. I don't really think there's much more that has to be said. We don't run a lot of the mana dorks, which, like Llanowar Elves, mainly because they don't give lands, like they don't put lands into play. So I would rather use stuff like Explore, Farseek, Cultivate. Even if they cost more mana, they're not a dead draw late game, because I could still use them to trigger these very powerful landfall abilities. So now let's look at the win conditions of this deck. It doesn't really have a set in stone win condition, but it does have stuff like Emeria Shepherd, which can get rid of all of your opponent's non-land permanents. It has stuff like Rampaging Balots, which could just trample over. So when I was creating this deck, I realized I was making a little bit too powerful for casual. So I thought making sure that there wasn't a solid win condition, like something which I just cast to win, would kind of make the games go longer, well, a little longer, and make the games more fun, which at the end of the day is the reason we're playing. We also have a lot of card draw in Sylvan Library, Valakut Exploration, Mystic Amora, Mystic Study, Omnath himself draws cards, Growth Spiral, Explore, like I showed earlier, Uro, Tireless Tracker. So we have a lot of card draw and a lot of ramp, which can help us in the early and late game. So now let's look over at a few mulligans. So what is this hand trying to do? Turn 1, we can cast a land. Turn 2, we can Growth Spiral into a third land. Turn 3, we can cast Omnath, drawing your card. And then turn 4, depends on what we draw, but looking at this hand alone, I would probably cast Tatyova. And with the 4 mana, if I drew a fetch land, I'd just cast Felidar Retreat, and then draw a card off of Tatyova. So all of a sudden it's turn 4, and you're very ahead. So I think since this is a casual deck, I don't really have to go too far into the mulligans, but I hope you like this deck, and please give me a like and subscribe. Thank you.